to share. Jim is one of the best speakers I've ever seen, so you're really going to get a lot out of it today. Keep your audio on mute. If we notice it's not, we can go in and mute that, just because we're working from home, right? So there's pets, kids, and everything else going on. Turn your camera off if you need to, whatever you're most comfortable with. Take a break when you need to. You don't need to sit in your chair. There will be 100 people on the call. So when Jim says something that excites you or you agree with, you just want to give him a little wave of your hands, then he'll know that you're engaged. We will have time for a question and answer afterwards. And also some housekeeping around. I know we're all really high-tech experts after working at home for almost 3 weeks, but in your right-hand corner, you can choose the speaker view or the gallery view. So if you choose gallery view, you're able to see all the participants today. Also along the bottom, you will have the opportunity to add to chat. So if you type on chat, you're able to either connect with anybody individually or address the whole group. So if you have any questions that come up, please feel free to enter them in that space and we will address them throughout the presentations. Right now, evaluations are more important than ever before. So we're going to be asking for your feedback. This leadership series is designed to respond to the most immediate needs we have right now at the not-for-profit level. So we want to make sure that we're working together, collaborating, and bringing in speakers and leading sessions that are going to be meaningful. We also want to start with just a few of our convening principles. This is something we're all in together. Nobody asked for COVID. Nobody could predict this. Our collective lives have halted as we know it. We've turned everything into virtual socializing, virtual training, virtual working, and there will be glitches. Technology is not perfect. The internet is overloaded. So we just have to hope we get through this session without it breaking down. Let's get to the next slide. We're going to be supporting each other through this session, through the upcoming sessions, and we want to prioritize some simple solutions. The biggest thing right now is we're all wondering what's next. So part of Leadership Wallow Region's goal is to help people identify some collaborations and maybe some resources that can be shared moving down. We've had different sessions identified to us as being important and collaboration being one. So we're looking at communicating clearly and trying to stay on top. Now, you didn't come here to hear me today, so I would like to take the opportunity. Oh, I missed one. Well, I'll let you read that. We talked about us being in an ever-shifting, changing world, but we're going through this together. Is that my last slide now? You see, not perfect. Can I just tell you about the strengths-based leadership? And this is something we all have to remember when we're doing our day-to-day work, and now more than ever, trust, compassion, stability, and hope. And that's how we're moving forward with these discussions. Next slide, please. Excellent. I'm not in the driver's seat. So I'm just going to take this quick introduction of Jim Clemmer. There's so much to say about Jim. Jim has become a very good friend of Leadership Wallow Region, and I look at him as a coach and mentor for many of the things I've gone through in the last couple of years. He's inspirational. He inspires action, really practical approach to leadership. He's world-renowned author, keynote speaker, coach, consultant, strategist, and just able to deliver the messaging in a way that we're able to absorb it and use it in our day-to-day practicalities. So I will not say any more, and I'll turn it over to you, Jim. Thank you so much.
Wow, after that introduction, I'm even interested in what I have to say. Yeah, I hope I can come anywhere close to meeting some of those kinds of objectives. I'm certainly happy to do what I can to help the helpers here today. and talk further about leadership and kind of remind ourselves of some basic principles during these challenging times. So I'm going to share my screen here, and there we go. Oh, try that. There, how's that? Is that, Diane, can you give me a thumbs up? Is that all right? Perfect, okay. So leading in turbulent times and dealing with change. Well, we're certainly dealing with a lot of change right now. And as I was putting some thoughts together for this presentation, I came across this quote, which I thought was very appropriate, that there are things we can learn certainly when we're calm and leading in calm times, and some we learn in storm. Actually, there's an old Greek philosopher centuries ago said that anybody can sail the ship when the sea is calm. It's when things get really stormy and difficult. And so kind of looking back at, of course, this isn't the first major catastrophe that humankind has gone through in many, many years as we look back over the centuries. And there's been a fair bit of study of hardiness, resilience, which I'm going to be talking a little bit about. This is one of numerous studies that have looked at the sort of choices or options or directions we can take when we're faced with particular adversity. This study was published a number of years ago. I think it was about 15 or 20 years ago. And it had looked back at people who had all gone through major catastrophic events. Some of them to do with war, natural disasters, the Holocaust survivors were in here. There was a number of different people in here. And they looked at those, they were now looking 15 or 20 years after those events, where were they now? And what they found was that a small group of people, think of the bell curve here, part of the bell curve saw this as an event that really made them stronger, appreciate life more. It ultimately was a real affirming or building activity for them. There was a number at the middle part of the bell curve was more around the kind of day-to-day, some days are good, some days are bad, kind of wavering back and forth. And others were permanently dispirited by the event, which is, of course, is very tragic, and things like PTSD and other sorts of lingering, very negative effects. And so we're going to talk today a little bit about what we're learning with all the different research around on how to try to stay more in steps 1 and 2 and try to avoid as much as we can step 3 for ourselves and obviously for others that we're leading. So as was posted on the website, we're going to be taking a look at these 3 sort of choices, whether lead, follow, or wallow. And we're going to hit a couple of themes around leadership being the role or the behaviors we have, not just the role we're in, it's our action, not our position. I'm going to talk a little bit about the trap of the 3 Ps, and I'll explain that. We don't want to be peeing ourselves. And we'll talk a bit as well about resilience. What research has shown are some of the keys to bouncing back from big setbacks like we're having right now, and how we can go from being very despondent, upset about all of this to making it more of a post-traumatic growth experience. We'll talk a little bit about that. And of course, that means choosing our frameworks. And I'm going to draw quite a bit on this newer field of positive psychology. I'm going to talk a bit about the work of Martin Seligman and the University of Pennsylvania and others. There's a tremendous amount of excellent work going on there. I've been part of the Canadian Positive Psychology Association for about 5 years now. And so I'll talk a little bit about some of that work and what we're learning as well about shifting our perspectives, shifting our leadership, and how I think that's going to be leading to rewiring our world, rewiring leadership, rewiring lots of things in the coming months and years. So that's a quick look at where we're going. We will send you, Leadership Waterloo Region will send you a follow-up, and we're offering 2 books. I'm going to be drawing a lot today from Growing at the Speed of Change material and research, and then the companion book to that is Growing the Distance. So for all of you, we'll send you a follow-up email with a code that you can have a complimentary download of either or both of those books. And then I'll also I'll be making a lot of references to research and material and suggestions, ideas throughout all of this. The follow-up email will have links to many of those, a copy of my slides, and this session is being recorded. So Bethan and Diane will be including that as well, links to that recording in case you want to see it again or share it with others. So that's a quick look at where we're headed. Let's talk then about the whole position that leadership is what we do, not the role that we're in. So it's about how we influence, how we connect, how we change, how we deliver results, etc. So that's kind of the foundation point. When I talk about leadership today, that's where I'm coming from with that sort of definition. All right, so let's step back a little bit. Before any of this took place, in fact, I wrote a little bit about this a few months ago, that Steve Stosny, in an article in Psychology Today entitled Headline Stress Disorder, was his article, and the subtitle was It Only Hurts When I Breathe. And in it, he was talking about, again, this is before any of this coronavirus issues hit, of how easy it is to get drawn into and totally stressed out by all the negativity. And the challenge today, of course, for all of us is how we pay attention to what's going on, how we stay informed, how we help the people we're leading stay informed, but at the same time not get overwhelmed by all of the catastrophic kinds of possibilities and disasters that may be upon us. So finding that balance, I think, is incredibly difficult. And avoiding some of what years ago in psychology, going back quite a number of years ago, was called the availability heuristic, where there's a tendency to estimate the risk and probability of risk and so on by what's in the news lately, and especially because we're hardwired to notice much more of what's wrong and more of calamity and disaster than what's right. So it's sometimes very difficult to get that right kind of balance. But if we look back through kind of the perspective of history, one of the terms that's become quite well known is this too shall pass. And where that really got popularized was about 150 years ago when William Blackwood published an article in which he said this. He told the story of an Eastern sage who was looking to have sort of a perpetual description of human affairs engraved, it turned out on a ring. And so what he had engraved was, and this too shall pass away. And of course, that goes in both directions. That goes for good times and that goes for bad times, that nothing is permanent. And the whole issue of impermanence, again, has been around for thousands of years. So at the time, he said, it's impossible to imagine a thought more truly and universally applicable to human affairs than that phrase. Well, of course, that's getting recycled again today. And sometimes it's a little difficult to recall or to remember that this too shall pass away. One of my very favorite authors on kind of long-term perspective is Steven Pinker at Harvard University, psychologist there, actually a Canadian, who's been living in the US and working at Harvard for many, many years. And this book, Enlightenment Now, he talks about how easy it is to become drawn in by disaster, calamity, despair springs eternal, which is a phrase of his that I love, and that for thousands of years now, lots of people have been forecasting doomsday and end of times and so forth. And again, the challenge is we don't want to discount the dangers that are around us today. There's clearly a lot of danger around us, and we clearly need to pay attention to what's going on and keep each other informed and not in any way pretend that there isn't a real crisis here or that we don't have to take utmost care. But at the same time, we need to kind of come back and balance, and especially all of us in leadership roles need to be reminded of some timeless kinds of principles. So I think back to this classic book of Charles Dickens, and of course the famous opening line, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. But he goes on to talk further about the age of foolishness and wisdom and light and darkness and despair, nothing before us, everything before us, and we're all going direct to heaven or going direct the other way. And in my mind, what this really does is point out the sort of extreme or the choices that we have as to which perspective we want to bring to things. What we need to be careful of is that we don't fall into the trap. Well, I bumped into somebody years ago who I hadn't seen for a while, and when I bumped into him, I kind of remembered why I hadn't seen him for a while. And I said, "Hey, Phil, how's it going?" And he said, "Oh, same crap, different day." Well, how do you argue with that? It's easy to walk around with our crap glasses on and have a real difficulty absorbing positivity, or to focus strictly on everything that's wrong and to lose perspective. This is a classic optical illusion. You look at the two dots, they're actually exactly the same size. I've actually measured them, but they look quite different by how they're framed. And today, more than ever, what we look for and how we frame what's ahead of us is absolutely vital. You may have seen this optical illusion, or this little illustration of perspective. When you look at this phrase, what do we see here? Well, we can say that opportunity is nowhere or opportunity is now here. Depends on what it is we're looking for. So, excuse me. Another, I think, a highly inspiring perspective, kind of historical perspective on choices that we have, comes from this classic book of Viktor Frankl, where he talks about his time in Nazi death camps in the Second World War. And he makes the observation that the one thing that can't be taken from us is our attitude and how we look at extremely difficult circumstances, that we can choose our own way. That what he saw were vast differences of people who survived those camps and kind of where they were coming from and what their perspective was varied a great deal. And so I'm going to be drawing on some of the work of Martin Seligman, and his work is really at the, I'm going to skip ahead here actually to one of his classic books. Martin Seligman's at the University of Pennsylvania. He's considered to be the father or the founder in many ways of positive psychology, which is a newer branch of cognitive psychology that has emerged over the last 20, 25, 30 years. This book, which came out in 2002, is considered to be a bit of the foundation book, although his earlier one called Learned Optimism is really the absolute foundation. But here he talks about the trap of the 3 Ps, how there's a tendency to take negative events and make them permanent, pervasive, and personal. Or if we boil that down even a little bit further, around explanatory style, and I'm going to reference some of the work at the University of Pennsylvania in a couple minutes and some of the resources that they have available for this. But explanatory style is where we take events that are permanent, universal, good events, and we see the goodness as universal, so that's a positive explanatory style, whereas a negative explanatory style is to see good events as temporary. Well, that was a fluke, that'll never happen. Boy, you got lucky there. And which is, of course, the whole practice really of despair. So what's our explanatory style? How are we explaining to ourselves and to others just what we're seeing and where we're at? Now, I'm a bit of a Star Wars fan, although I don't dress up and go to Star Wars conventions, but I love some of the little philosophical elements that are in Star Wars. Joseph Campbell is one of my favorite researchers around the whole notion of the hero's journey. As you may know, Lucas used a lot of his work and consultation in the development of Star Wars. And what's powerful to me about Star Wars is this idea of the dark side and the force. And of course, fear can lead towards the dark side. And it can take us into some very dark, difficult places. And so as we kind of look at resilience, so what is it then that makes for highly resilient people? And again, a lot of research, a lot of work has been done around resilience. Diane Couteau in an article in Harvard Business Review, I think it's an excellent article, encourage you to look it up, talks about how it's easy to fall into the sense of helplessness, hopelessness, which is what Seligman was just talking about, the trap of the 3 Ps. I used that 3 Ps example one time in a group. Someone said, oh, that reminds me. On the weekend, our grandson was over, 4-year-old grandson. He came running down in the morning. He said, Grandpa, somebody peed in my bed. So we talked a little bit about how easy it is sometimes to pee ourselves and not to recognize that to some extent we can do this to ourselves. So the resilient people, Diane is saying, are able to find some sort of meaning and looking for what can we learn, what can we develop further. And so in a more recent work of Seligman's, and I would highly recommend, of course I recommend almost any of his books, and in our follow-up links, I'll link you to a number of other things and resources of his. But in this book, he has an entire chapter dedicated to work that he and colleagues are doing around post-traumatic growth. So how we can take difficult times that can lead to PTSD and instead figure out how to lead to PTG, post-traumatic growth. Not easy, very difficult many times, requires oftentimes some real help, support, counseling, etc. But what's emerging from this work, and most of this research is heavily grounded in evidence, which is one of the appeals I have, what appeals to me about positive psychology, it's deeply evidence-based. And in that evidence, what has emerged is a formula called the PERMA formula. And the PERMA formula talks about 5 main elements, one being positive emotion. And there's a positivity ratio that has emerged here, which is roughly 5 to 1. 5 positive comments, thoughts, focus on strengths, etc., to 1 negative. It shows a little bit of how we're wired as human beings, that we pay 5 times more attention to negative things, or that it has a 5 times higher impact than positive. So we have to really counterbalance that. Engagement is around our level of connection, engagement, being in the zone, etc. Today, more than ever, relationships, Diane talked a little bit about this at the outset, absolutely critical today, supporting each other, helping each other, reaching out, looking for ways to bring meaning, purpose. Of course, the work many of you are doing is around helping to bring that deeper sense, helping to reach out, support others, and a sense of making progress, a sense of accomplishment, a sense of moving the needle in some way. So what the research has shown is that the people who are most flourishing or most able to deal with traumatic events are using different points of this formula in different ways. I would encourage you, again, I'll include this in the follow-up links, encourage you to, if you Google Seligman PERMA model, as in quotation marks like that, you'll come across a lot of different resources that can help you with this. So let me talk a little bit about a framework or a model that we've been using for a long time that is the central part of the book, Growing at the Speed of Change, which you're welcome to download. And I think of it like a movie producer, where a movie producer frames each shot to convey emotions, a story, etc. And of course, we do that almost every minute of the day. We're framing how we're looking at things. And so if we look at the center of the, back to the bell curve idea, one is that we can be following. We can look to others, let's see what's going to happen, what should I be worried about this or not? And these days particularly, we need to really look to our healthcare experts and leaders to really get that kind of direction. The upside is being hopeful, the downside is being helpless and cynical. And being, I'm going to skip right over to how we then try to climb the stairs. We're fighting gravity here because our natural inclination is to slide further down, not to look for what can I do to capitalize or turn around or change or deal with this situation and avoid sliding way down into the pit of despair, hopelessness, helplessness, the sense of wallowing, where we can spend way too much time in pity city and perhaps jump on the bitter bus, drive down helpless highway, past whining way, dead end drive, pessimism place, where there's no hope, there's no way, we may as well give up, why even bother? And of course, we need occasional visits to pity city. We need to vent. We need to give voice sometimes to our fears and our difficulties. And we need to help others do that, especially these days. And that's what's really difficult, I think, is to really look at getting that balance. Because what we're really talking about around all of this is thinking about our thinking. An old idea that's being rediscovered in many ways around research like positive psychology, but the old idea of mindfulness, of paying attention to our thinking, of looking at how am I currently framing this situation? Am I framing it from the perspective of hope, possibility, and what could be? Am I a little more in a neutral kind of territory and waiting to see what's going to happen? Or am I really in danger of sliding down into the dark side, sliding down into wallowing territory? Now, I don't expect you to, I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but this is a chart that's trying to sort of distinguish and help us recognize, because step number one is to recognize our thinking. And that's where cognitive psychology and so much therapy today is focused on helping people tune into and recognize their thinking. And so that's step one. So often it's like describing water to a fish. When we live there, it's hard to recognize the emotions that we're living in and to see our own thinking. So to step back and to say, well, there's this range of reality, which can be at the pessimistic end or the optimistic end. And so where are we? Which glasses are we wearing? Are we wearing glasses of fear, of negativity, bad, or hopefulness, or possibility thinking? Are we seeing the worst? We're finding the best in people. There was that story of the little girl that was out riding in the car with her mother one day, and she said to her mommy, where are all the stupid jerks and idiots today? And her mother said, well, they only come out when your father's driving. It's funny how that sometimes works, how people bring out the best or the worst. So what are we looking for? What are we seeing? Because there's a whole lot of evidence to show that that's often what we get. So it starts with recognizing my own thinking. Then it goes on to saying, well, what is it that I see in others, in my leadership role, in my support coaching role to others? What am I focused on? Am I focused on what's wrong, what needs to be fixed, seeing the worst? And again, the difficult balancing act is we shouldn't ever be ignoring that, but it's, are we counterbalancing it with what's right, what's going well, how we bring out the best, how we pull and coach others? So it's about finding that right balance. And again, the research is showing 5-to-1 ratio. 5 times more focus on strengths, 5 times more focus on possibilities, but not totally ignoring by any means the negative side, and making sure that we're having good, open, honest conversations about the dangers and the problems and the issues. So where I want to go with in the next number of slides then is to provide you with a bunch of possibilities, of options, ideas, because the shift has hit many of our plans. John Lennon in one of his songs had that famous line that life's what happens while you're making other plans. Life has certainly happened in a very different way than all of us expected just a month ago. So what are our choices when it hits the fan? This, by the way, is a Dharma doll that you see on the left, which is the Japanese symbol. It is heavily weighted on the bottom. When you push it down, it pops back up again. And so it's to remind everybody that we need to be resilient and pop back up. So how do we do that? Well, how do we keep ourselves in leading mode? And how do we help others, our teammates or colleagues, spend more time in leading mode? So I want to give you a series of ideas, suggestions, a kind of menu that hopefully some of this will be helpful to you, and take from it what you think might be helpful. So we'll start first of all with taking care of ourselves, because there's that old analogy, it's been around, it's almost become a cliche, of the oxygen masks, putting the mask on yourself first in the airplane, right, and then take care of your child, because our tendency might be to look after somebody else first, but we can't be of any help to anybody else if we aren't looking after ourselves. So we've got to really make sure, especially today, that we're looking after ourselves so we can be in shape to look after others. So some thoughts. Well, I'm a huge believer in meditation, and I found especially in the last few weeks, this has been enormously useful for me for sleeping at night, to start the day. I highly recommend a Insight Timer, which is an app that's available in Apple and in the Android store. It has over 24,000 apps, or 24,000 meditations of all different sorts, and guided meditations, all sorts of meditations. And I've been using it for years. I find it's all free. It's an enormously useful resource. Our family is using it, and it really helps, I find, to calm, reduce stress a little bit, get our focus on that mindfulness, thinking about our thinking, watching our thinking, looking at our thinking, taming that monkey mind, racing thoughts that keep us up at night or that drive us crazy at 3 in the morning, and really trying to get a better handle and a balance on all of that. So highly recommend, whether it's this one or whatever, that you practice some form of mindfulness meditation. I think it's absolutely vital today. I've also been a long time big believer in visualization and imagery. Some of the meditations available in this app are around visualization, around imagery, visualizing your body in a calm state, visualizing the outcome you want to see with your team, with your organization, with yourself, visualizing harmony, visualizing strong relationships, whether it's at home or in the workplace or wherever it may be. But again, tremendous amount of evidence in the whole field of neuroscience showing that visualization and the imagery that we have has a tremendous impact on our expectations and on all sorts of outcomes. I also would encourage you to really look for rational optimism. Now, I've published in the last couple of weeks a number, I'm publishing daily now a blog or an update on LinkedIn and Facebook and other places, so you can follow there if you want to follow. But I'm publishing what are some reasons for optimism, not again to ignore the problems, but to try to keep perspective, or what are we learning? What are some things that we can take away from all of this that we can, that are reasons for some hope and some possibilities? Because the opposite, to be given to despair, is just really unthinkable. And so it means really catching your catastrophic thinking. This is a basic tenet of positive psychology. It links all the way back to the idea of thinking about your thinking, seeing your thinking, catching your catastrophic thinking. What I have done in the past, found I've had to do it quite as much lately, but I've actually worn a little elastic on my wristband. And when I catch myself thinking something catastrophic, just snap the wristband. We've had a couple of personal challenges and tragedies over the last year in our family, and it's been very, very easy to go into the dark side, to let the dark side come in. And so catch yourself and finding a way to snap out of it and say, whoa, wait a minute. Let's get things back in perspective. Let's look at that thinking. Is that thinking really helping? I'm going to talk about a formula, positive psychology formula, in a moment that's aimed at this. Gratitude lists. Been a long-time believer, a long-time follower of building and regularly reviewing all the things we have to be grateful for. And boy, these days, the the leadership we have in our country, the healthcare system we have in our country. There's so many things that we have to be grateful for, and our support and family and community. We've got a long list of things to be grateful for, and we need to keep reviewing and keep remembering just what we do have and the positives that we have going for us. An exercise I found extremely useful. And we used to do this years ago when our kids were younger. They're all now off living on their own with their own families. And I know many of them are continuing to practice this around the dinner table. What are the 3 best things that happened today? Or when I go to sleep, it's become a ritual for me at nighttime where I'm laying in bed to think about, I usually have more than 3, usually come up with 6 or 8 or 10. But what are the best things out of the day? No matter how crappy the day's been, no matter how disastrous things have happened that day, what are still the best things that have come out of that day? How can I counterbalance with the force, that dark side? Assessing and leveraging strengths. There's an offshoot of the positive psychology movement called viacharacter.org. There's the website. The VIA Character Strengths Institute is where you can take a free assessment of your strengths, and it will then give you from 1 to 24, because it has 24 character strengths that have been validated, I think now something like 8 million people. And so you can identify your 5 signature strengths. What are the 5 top things that you are strongest at? And the more you can play to those strengths, the more you can build on those strengths, the more you can live in that strength zone, the more effective you're going to be as a leader and as a person. Affirmations and auto-suggestions are also emerging as being a very key element, linking back in many ways to imagery, to visualization, but it's what we're telling ourselves day to day, what we're doing, how we're reinforcing either what's right or what's wrong. It really is another technique. I've used a lot of quotations over the years. I'm a big believer in quotations and inspiring kinds of sayings and so on, and I use those a lot of times in this way. Make sure you're taking care of your mind, your body, your spirit. Today, more than ever, it's important that we get good nutrition, that I think we do things like meditation, like some kind of exercise, whether it's running up and down the stairs in your house because you haven't got anything else, or running on the spot. I've seen some humorous videos of people putting on a slippery floor a bunch of soap and turning it into a treadmill with their hands on the counter. There's all kinds of different ways, just running on the spot, finding ways to look after ourselves. Excuse me. Today, I think it's incredibly important that we reach out and ask for help, whether that's counseling, and I know a number of you provide those kinds of counseling services, whether it's just reaching out. I found it really important to stay in touch, and the technology that's available, and there's one of the blessings today. We have such incredible technology available to keep us connected, keep us in touch, do the kinds of things like we're doing right now. We're having lots of video conferences with our grandkids and with our families and with our friends. We have a little group that used to get together every Thursday night at the local pub for a beer. We now each grab a beer and are connected up through WhatsApp video, and we sit there having a beer together, the 5 or 6 of us on our little app, so that we can still stay connected. So finding ways to keep those connections and build those connections, I think is very, very important. One of Seligman's books is called Learned Optimism. It is an outstanding book. Highly recommend it. It is, I think, the beginning point. It came out in 1990. So it was very, very early pioneering work around how we can learn to be much more optimistic and the tremendous impact and benefits that that has. And lastly, I would say, well, does your calendar reflect all of these values and priorities? And really doing a check from time to time. Am I on the right track? So I mentioned the formula for strengthening optimism. It's the ABCDE formula that comes way back from Learned Optimism. It talks about recognizing an adverse event or situation. Again, it's thinking about our thinking. It's recognizing that, which is often difficult step number 1. And then what are my beliefs about that event? What's my explanatory style? This is where the trap of the 3 Ps and so on comes in. And if I keep believing and thinking that way, where's that going to take me? Usually it's not going to take me to a very good place if I'm falling into the trap. That's the dark side. It's sucking me down. It's pulling me in. So how can I dispute or distract or use rational optimism or take a look at what I can do to snap myself out of that thinking, and how can I energize? Again, maybe using visualization or different techniques to energize where I really want to get to. Again, I would recommend Googling. If you Google Seligman ABCDE model, you'll get lots of good suggestions, ideas for applying this formula. So let me go on to giving you some suggestions for helping others to stay in leading mode. So I would first of all say, let's make sure, Diane referred to this at the beginning, but that we review strengths and successes. We've done this before. How have we done this before? How can we tap into, we have in our DNA 1,000 generations of people dealing with crisis throughout history. It's deep in us. How can we tap into that? How can we draw on the resources, on the strengths and the successes that we've had and use the force rather than allowing the dark side to overwhelm us? Draw on the force, use those strengths, balance the strengths we need to make with the shifts we need to make. And of course, big shift we're making right now is social distancing. We clearly need to be doing that and continue practicing that and using things like this technology. And so how can we blend strengths and shifts and maybe have conversations about that with your own team, with your own people, and agree on ways to limit pity parties. Some groups have looked at, that we've worked with on this over the years, have said, whoop, sounds like that's the bitter bus, sounds like getting on the bitter bus, and they've even had a little fine pot kind of systems, but then realizing, well, you know, we do need to vent once in a while. So let's maybe have a short visit to Pity City. Okay, let's take a 5-minute pity break here, and let's give vent to all of our fears, frustrations, problems, issues, and just get it out. All right, let's now step back and take a look at, okay, so where do we go from here? We feel this way, we're enormously frustrated or angry or upset or emotional. Let's acknowledge that. Now let's figure out how to reframe, how to refocus, how to get ourselves back on track again. One thing I've found extraordinarily useful at retreats over the years and lots of different situations, or even just starting with your meetings, or maybe the next conference call that you have, where you just talk a little bit about what have we accomplished in the last week or two? What are the good things that are going on? What's some of the recognition? What should we celebrate? What are the positives? Because that can be really energizing. And again, it can bring us back to balance, to say, hey, there's a lot of good stuff happening. Hey, there's a lot of things we can do. Most of this call is going to be focused on what's wrong, what we need to fix, we need to do all of that. But let's do it from the realm of possibility, from what could be, from what we've been able to do in the past, from the strength that we're coming from. The old cliche of starfish story, probably you've heard this story a number of times in the speaker world that I live in. It's become a little bit of a joke about how the starfish story has been so overused, but it's the idea of the person walking down the beach and throwing stranded starfish who are washed up in the beach back in the water, and somebody coming along and saying, there's thousands of them there on the beach. How are you ever going to save all of these? And the person throws the one back in and says, well, I can't save them all probably, but I can save this one, and this one, and this one. And so it's a reminder that, well, let's maybe share those stories and those examples of how we're helping one person at a time, one family at a time, one group at a time, and making some kind of difference, a sense of progress, a sense of making a difference in one way or another. Also strongly recommend this is a time to do some real sweet spot coaching as a leader, looking at the alignment of strengths that your individuals or coachees might have, what their passions are, and what the organization or community need might be. So how can we keep those lined up? These are we call it the coaching sweet spot, and continuing to look for ways to do that. An exercise I've used a lot over the years in lots of different settings is what should we keep, stop, start doing. It can be at a personal level. What should I as a leader keep, stop, start doing? Please give me your feedback. Or what should we as a team be doing? What's been on these calls that we're doing regularly? What's working? What isn't working? What do we keep, stop, start? It's an excellent kind of progress check or a little bit of review to be doing periodically so that we're balancing working in the team or in our leadership role with on the team or on our leadership role. Courageous conversations are absolutely vital today. One of my previous books was called Moose on the Table, and it was all about having open, transparent, courageous conversations that this is absolutely vital. We need to find ways to make it safe, make it maybe anonymous, but find ways for people to be able to say what they really believe or feel or what's really going on. There's just way too many examples of how things get suppressed or held back, and it makes the situation much, much worse. Practice upward leadership. It's not enough to just lead your team. You may need to lead upward as well. Sometimes that's every bit as critical, to take initiative, to do the sorts of things we're talking about here, possibly even coaching upward, but finding ways to reach up to the people that you might be reporting to, or to your board, to others that may be part of your direction or your team or bosses that may be getting a little off track right now. This is an excellent time to step back and to really say, what do we need to do? What can we get rid of? What do we prioritize? I mean, we're being forced to do that to a large extent, and we need to just constantly be doing that even more ruthlessly or vigorously today, just like in the garden. That's how we encourage new growth, is to get rid of weeds and old growth. Regularly checking in with yourself, with your team, obviously loved ones, family, emotional check-ins. Where are people at? Finding ways to check in and to allow some of the venting, allow some of the dealing with some of those issues. Now more than ever, serving your servers. What do you need? How can I serve you? How can I support you? What can I do? And of course, means even more, you need to take care of yourself in order to be in a position to be able to help others. And today, it's especially critical to balance information and communication. I'll often ask in a workshop, how many people here want more communication? Just about everybody puts up their hand. How many people want more emails? Almost nobody puts up their hand. And yet, what do many managers do when they hear that there's more communication needed? Send out more emails. So there's a big difference between information, which is often one way in giving it, and communication, which is usually conversational and is certainly two-way. Okay, well, let me finish up here with how I think this time is going to rewire and reboot and re-energize our world in many ways. I think it's going to illustrate even more how interconnected and interdependent we are as a world, as a community, as a country, and hopefully we'll carry all those lessons on into the future once we get through this. That harnessing the power of collaboration and teamwork today is especially vital. Again, hopefully we'll build on that and see how critical that is as we go forward. I mentioned earlier about courageous conversations. Hiding or ignoring bad news leads to disaster. It leads to safety disasters. It leads to organizational disasters. There's evidence that at Boeing, it led to the death of, or the downing of 2 airplanes. I mean, there's so many examples that of how we have to create environments where people can tell us what is going wrong or what the problems might be. So we really need to work at building transparency, openness, strengthening trust. Again, hopefully this time will continue that idea. I think this time as well is illustrating to many people that, hey, this working from home, this virtual collaboration has some real benefits. And maybe we need to, once this is over, balance that out just a little bit better. We also are seeing the importance of being rich in relationships, rich bank accounts in relationships, so that we can draw down on those, and we need to continue to strengthen those relationships. We see today how separating the vital few from the trivial many, when we look at meetings, emails, projects, tasks of all sorts, so often we get caught up in the tyranny of the urgent, the tyranny of the trivial. And today, of course, we're being forced to focus on what's really important. Hopefully we'll continue that on into the future. And so whether we're going to be victims of change or victors of change depends to a very large extent on our agility and our flexibility. Again, I sure hope that we can take that forward. Well, I said I love to take inspiration from quotes and ideas and other places. Over the years, I've drawn a bit of inspiration from Ella Wheeler Wilcox, who was a 19th century American poet and author. And so some of the language she uses is a little bit old-fashioned, but as I think about this theme of navigating and navigating change, I love this little poem of hers where she talks about how one ship drives east and another drives west with the same self winds that blow. 'Tis the set of the sails and not the gales that tell them the way to go. Like the winds of the sea are the winds of fate as we voyage along through life. 'Tis the set of the soul that decides its goal and not the calm or the strife. I think that's an excellent reminder for us that it's how we set the sail, it's how we as leaders respond to these incredibly stormy kinds of times. And the danger of mixing my metaphors, but coming back to this inspiration that I've drawn over the many years from Star Wars and the powerful hero's journey that Joseph Campbell helped Lucas with way back when. Yoda here talks about, for my ally is the Force, and a powerful ally it is. So I'm going to wish that the Force may be with you.
Excellent, Jim. Thank you so much. I know I'm sure we have a lot of questions here in the group. If we could open it up, I know I have a couple of questions myself. You can either ask your questions through the chat, or you can turn your mic on and ask Jim directly. Have any? Jim, I had a question about managing change virtually. You know, I've always felt a strength as a leader is being able to meet in person and have that familiarity and be able to read people's body language in a different way. Do you have any tips on managing that virtually?
Yeah, well, again, that's a wonderful thing of being able to have this video kind of capability, which even 10 or 15 years ago, we would have never been able to do what we're doing now. So I think it can help with that. I think it's really important that we have some time to maybe check in, do a little bit of a temperature check. Where are people at? What is it that you're maybe most concerned about? What is it that you're feeling fairly hopeful about? Like having that kind of, finding that balance, I think is more important than ever. And perhaps looking for, again, those strengths and shifts. What is the strengths that we can build on? What are the good things that are going on? What are the shifts that we have to make? I think that's important. Maybe regular check-ins with your team, scheduled kinds of, whether it's daily, every couple days, weekly, or whatever it is, but so that people know we're going to be checking in with each other and looking after each other. Those are a few thoughts that come to mind. What do you find, Diane? I know that you're in the midst of all of this, and you're also working with lots of different leaders over these last couple of weeks. What are some of your suggestions?
Well, the regular check-in and, you know, realizing we're all human. We've all been thrown into this. I've had quite a few people talk to me about whether it's through a class, and I'd like to welcome all of our classmates of 2020 here today, as well as some of our alumni. But people checking in saying, you know, this is the first at-home work opportunity I've had on a regular basis. And it's that trust. So they're feeling maybe their board's checking in on them too much. What are you doing? What are you doing? Or their supervisor or boss, whatever that may be. So I find it's a respectful check-in that's more collaborative and not as directionally, what have you got done today?
Yeah, the term I heard used once was snoopervision. we don't want too much snoopervision, and I think that's an excellent point that you raise, is that it needs to be a check-in, how are you doing, or what can we do, or how can we work together, not a I'm checking up on you kind of call. That's an excellent point.
Was there any other questions at all? Well, I can tell you, I have taken so much from today, Jim. The optimism you bring, I think I was suffering at some point from headline fatigue syndrome. It's everywhere.
Sure is.
And then to jump right into the pity party, which is so easy to do. But again, just looking at your strengths, looking at those VIA strengths is such a great suggestion. And the ABCD, learning an E, like learning what that is for you and what that means. Keep, stop, start, I think also is very key at this time. We're not keeping business as usual.
Right.
I haven't talked to anybody who really is. Right. So it's looking at what are those priorities.
Yeah.
And those courageous conversations are difficult. And you made us remember that that's important to have, but in the most transparent way, because we have to be realistic when talking about what's going on in the world right now. And we can't hide bad news, as you said, or pretend it doesn't exist. But your post-traumatic growth gave me hope.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Seligman and his group have actually trained over 1 million people in the US military around that framework and model. And they're tracking, using control groups and so on, and tracking what are the techniques and approaches that help people, ideally before the traumatic event, but which of course isn't possible now for many people, but after the traumatic event, what can we do to try to rebuild and to retrospectively really strengthen that resilience? But I'll say one other thing about the headline stress disorder, Diane, that you mentioned. And what I find is useful, and I picked this up somewhere along the way, is to not sit there and gorge on a steady stream of news. And but instead to have kind of, well, morning, noon, and evening, quick skim of the headlines, make sure there's nothing new, and especially for many people in leadership roles on this call, you need to stay informed, you need to stay up to date with what's going on so that you can sift through that and bring that to others, but doing it in a way that doesn't get you overwhelmed with just how dire this thing could be and just how awful the health and the economic crisis could be. That, I think, is a major challenge of our time today.
Getting your information from a reliable source.
Yeah, well, I'm a huge CBC fan, so I think that they're a great source to get a lot of information from. And I think they've been doing a pretty good job of balancing with stories of good things that are going on, stories of how people are supporting each other, and I think it's important that we have that kind of balance.
Excellent. We had Christina Campbell say in the chat that she took a break from social media to clear her mind, and I know I've really cut back as well. That's I agree, Christina. It becomes overwhelming, and people like to share all the bad news. But if anybody can get through this, I think it's Waterloo Region. We have strong leaders in this community throughout. I'd also like to be, just draw on the points you made about servant leadership and followership. We do have to lead up. Just because someone's a position doesn't mean they're the right person to lead for every situation. So whether it's leading up so that your own position is benefited in a way that there's more trust and more progress moving forward, or just being able to assist those around you. We're all human, and it's really important to recognize that more now than ever.
Yeah, and I'm going to include in some of those follow-up links a material on upward leadership, some of the techniques and approaches and so on. But yeah, taking that initiative, making sure that whoever you're trying to influence, your board or your leader, whoever it is, that you're being assertive and able to help them, because to a large extent they're running scared and don't really know what to do with a lot of this, just like everybody else.
They are. And every time we speak, I end up with another book on my shelf. So I'm going to have to order Martin Seligman's Flourish. I do not have a copy of that. Yeah. And thank you for all the resources. And really thank you for your generosity of giving all of our attendees the ability to download 2 of your books, which, you know, I have used Growing the Distance many times over the years. So I don't know, Jim, we've had tons of people come through in the chat, just say, thank you, Jim. Well done. Very, you know, got a lot out of the session. People were just really, really pleased with today. And if there's any follow-up, can we pass it on to you?
Absolutely, sure. Yeah, I'm trying to help in whatever way I can. We're all in this together, trying to figure out how to support each other.
Thank you for that. Your leadership's really appreciated.
Well, thank you for your leadership and what your organization is doing. I think this idea of fostering leaders and strengthening leaders across the community and the work that your organization is doing is just so critical. And so I appreciate the work you're doing and want to support it and help in any way I can.
Thank you, Jim. We will be in touch, and we will pass on as well some of these notes that we've had in the chat so that you can have a look as well. Thank you. So as I mentioned earlier, we will be running these sessions twice a week, and we're trying to respond to, you'll recall when you registered, there was a little section about what would you like to see. So on Friday, April 3rd, we have Jim Moss coming in from Plasticity Labs. And yeah, you read it right. Happiness during COVID, WTF. So what does this mean? Jim is really going to take a step off of where Jim, or yeah, both two Jims, here we go. I thought I misspoke there for a minute. A step off and look at some of the outcomes of workplace culture and how culture and health are tied together and what that means right now when you're managing teams and how we can move into that. On April 6th, I will lead a session where we will actually have homework for people to do before they come in. So this asset-based planning and collaboration, we had those registrations coming in asking for more opportunities for collaboration. So through this, you'll be given a small exercise to fill out some of your assets in your organization. It's a map. We'll come together and you'll be put into smaller groups several times, so that this will be a cameras on session where you'll be able to meet other community members and you'll be able to have discussion around, you know, what do we have, what do we need, where are we going, and how can we collaborate in any way, and even if it's just through those relationships. For the 9th, we've partnered with Capacity Canada, and oh my goodness, Fred Galloway, I've had his training twice. He's a wonderful, wonderful speaker, and he is about governing in uncertain times. So this session will be for executive directors or CEOs with up to 3 board members. So we're trying to open it up to as many as we can. So ideally that's 4 people from organizations. So again, let's move that open. If you have ideas of sessions you want to see, if you're facing crisis or if you're facing any obstacle that feels unsurmountable, reach out and we'll help you make connections. We'll help connect you to maybe people with similar issues or someone we know in the community or within our alumni base that can maybe help out, give advice, and move from there. Am I missing anything on the chat here? I just want to follow up. Yeah, lots more about people needing to feel super productive when they're at home. You you know, I'll speak to Jim Moss about this as well. We had a conference call with him this morning, just fantastic speaker as well. But Jim is going to touch on that because it's adding that extra level of stress to an already stressful situation. So again, we'll learn more about followership, because as followers, we all report to somebody. And as followers, it's important that we learn to manage that. Anything else? Great. Look at, I already have someone saying Matt White's coming on the 3rd. Thank you, Matt. So a show of hands for Jim. This has been a fantastic experience, such a great use of my time. My optimism is back, and we are going forward. There's lots of clapping hands on the screen. I bet you a week ago, most of the people here did not know how to make clapping hands on a video chat, but now they do. So this is an incredible feat all in itself. Thank you so much, everyone. Please stay in touch, and we'll be reaching out with more of this nonprofit free leadership series. Take good care of each other and be kind to yourself. Thank you. Bye-bye.